Here we go again. Tainted Grail is one of those board games that made £350 million on Kickstarter. Enough to fund the NHS for a whole year, or at least that's what a boss told me once. In my nightmares. Each backer received 5 plastic things, 3 bigger plastic things, enough cards to build a life-size hospital, and when it all gets a bit too much, you can calm your anxiety down with an included book. By now you know how this goes. Publisher makes some nice, pretty miniatures, put some adverts on Facebook, Kickstarter previews rave about the epic scope, and the multi-million-dollar grassroots story perpetuates itself. A great example of this is our recently reviewed Batman Gotham City Chronicles, a game with a good idea trapped somewhere under a bonnet of rules clutter, excessive production, and a drive to fulfill the visuals at the sacrifice of everything else. I get the appeal of pretty miniatures, I really do, but as someone who had to back way too many of these schmuck starters to review on the channel, I get the opposite feeling when I open one of these boxes as opposed to a normal board game. Instead of excitement, elation, and anticipation, I just get anxiety because I'm afraid that it's going to be filled with like live bees. Yet here we are again, so maybe finally one of these Plastosaurus Rexes actually nails the landing. Maybe we'll pledge $200 and get a justified investment. Maybe, just maybe, this game is great. It's not, but let's see if it even gets close. Tainted Grail, in the words of publisher Awaken Realms, is a fantastic adventure set in a dark reimagining of Arthurian legend. And what they mean when they say that is that you'll poodle around a giant map composed of tarot-sized cards looking for adventure in places like Camelot, except it's spelled with a K, not a C, because it's cool like that. That's cool spelled with a K. That joke worked better on paper. Each card that composes the map is a location. Your characters are a group of misfits and outcasts, a ragtag group of human rags that is the last hope of Avalon, a dying world that people were never meant to inhabit. There were real heroes that set out to fix it, except they failed. And now it's down to you. The sinew of this landscape are menhirs, gigantic statues that hold reality together, boiled too long in neglect and a supernatural substance called weirdness. Each statue has a dial that at the start of each day ticks down. Once the dial reaches 0, the menhir goes dark. Any cards that are not in reach of one that's still lit up immediately fade away into the weirdness. But from the perspective of us, players, these places stop existing until we relight the statue again. What's happening to these places full of people, settlements, animals, traveling merchants, and mystical beings whilst the menhirs are dark? That is part of Tainted Grail's charm. Why are the menhirs going dark? How does the weirdness work? What happened to the expedition of heroes that left before you? Who are the Four Dwellers? And if there's a miniature of one of them in the box, does that mean I'll have to fight them? Why is Arav a dead ringer for Wheels from Dicebreaker? None of these are questions with readily available answers. They're a tantalizing mystery, and the only way to find out more is to cannonball into Avalon head first. Apart from the wheels bit, that's just a coincidence. Or is it? Each card you visit can be explored, meaning you can either flip it or save yourself the bother and go directly to this giant tome, find the appropriate section, read a bit of narrative, and make a choice of what to do. In this totally made-up location of Efkaville, you could, for example, visit the handsome village mayor, or you could attempt to recover the Almanac of Eternity, or you could pet Poochie, the village dog. I think we're gonna go for Poochie. And of course, Poochie is the Lord Demon Abraxas in disguise, and now we're all dead. Okay. These locations are the chewy bits that make up this mystery. Avalon is a whole continent, but what each card brings is shrouded in the unknown. You're even handed a map at the start of the game of the entire continent, but with a fair warning that it's old and probably so you can sort of glean a direction or an idea of what to do when you're given a quest, but you're never really certain. Not to mention that as a Kickstarter, Tainted Grail was a refreshing change from your typical blockbuster campaigns. Instead of scores and scores of miniatures, you only get 8, because that's all the game needs. You can alternatively pledge for an extra box of monsters if you want miniatures, but they are entirely unnecessary for the game to function. And the majority of the stretch goals won't be shipping at the same time with the core box, but many months later. The emphasis is shifting from, here, look at this big box of stupid things, to we're gonna really slow down and make sure that we're gonna deliver a well thought out thing when it's ready. And I have all of the time in the world for this ethos. And that's the magic. But anyone who's ever played an open world video game for more than 5 or 10 hours will tell you that magic wears off. Open world board games with a 40-hour campaign are a pretty new territory, so we came up with our own classification of what we think makes this a solid Santa. I don't know why I said Santa. It just sort of made sense in my head. What works in hour 1 isn't necessarily true for hour 10 or 20. A lot of these games focus on survival, and the thing about survival is that it can become a bit tedious. Let's see if it evolves its mechanisms to accommodate this. Tainted Grail is broken up into 15 chapters, each providing you with a quest, so you have a reasonable direction to stride towards, rather than aimlessly bimbling around the continent, investigating curious things like, what's under that log? Since each miniature only allows you to access cards that directly surround its location, you'll need to find resources such as food, wealth, and magic to get its jollies back in order. Once relit, you'll be able to press on further. The problem is that if you want to do anything, you need to spend energy. And just like in the real world, you're only allotted a certain amount a day, you can push yourself further, but then you'll have less the next day. So it all kind of evens itself out in the end. There's only so many logs you can look under before you go, that's enough logs for me, Mum, I'm going to bed. The meat and gristle is exploring each location, spending some energy, and then diving into a big book of story to see what narrative string you can pull out. Yet to get to the next narrative string, you'll have to find resources to light more miniatures along the way. Sometimes these things overlap and the string and the gristle become the same. The narrative bit gives you the food you've been looking for, which, by the by, you'll have to spend at least once a day, lest you want to have less energy the next day, so you can do less exploration and find less food to have less energy the next day. Maybe there's a village ripe for plundering and you have no morals. Sometimes you'll have to fend off a wild beast engaging with the game's combat system. And I don't know if you heard, but beasts are full of meat and gristle. And sometimes you'll have to actively pursue these resources, burning energy faster than a kerosene candle. The answer is 10. 10 hours is the threshold at which point survival starts feeling utterly tedious and becomes bothersome busy work that's just in the way of progressing through the narrative. Because the variables like health, wealth, food, and magic are solely to do with survival, all the game can do to impose a sense of threat is to take those resources away. Of course, when survival becomes boring, you can't help but feel that the game is constantly slowing you down. 10 hours later, you're still looking for a boar to kill just so you can load up on food before you set off and do other things until you run out of boar and once again go looking for a boar to kill. Survival doesn't bring any meaningful choices. To survive is not a decision, it's a necessity. I think Awakened Realms knows this because a lot of the character progression is to do with mitigating this constant need for food, energy, or anything else. As you accrue experience, you'll get access to skill cards which permanently enhance your character with rules exceptions. For example, you could get a card that gives you more energy each day, or a card that makes miniatures cheaper to activate, or a card that makes hunting more profitable. But strangely, as much as it allows you to drift away from that busy work system, maybe still politely staying friends on Facebook, but never really texting or getting together for a coffee like a bad ex or an overbearing parent, it crashes back into your life demanding attention. Seeded into the game are events that will sort of check up on you. If you're struggling, they will shower you with resources, kind of like mechanical nepotism. Or if you're doing too well, just gently take all of this away and put it into a savings account, because you're far too irresponsible. The checkup thing I just described doesn't just feel arbitrary, which is bad enough, but it's antithetical to the experience the game is trying to create. It's so obvious what the game designer's intentions are, and in a narrative adventure, that's bad because you don't want to see the framework, you don't want to be taken out of the adventure. So often the game feels like you're not so much allowed to run free, but you're having a guided tour of Avalon. Go see this, don't do that, now go to verse 7, now go to verse 21, now go to verse 11, now go to verse... Tainted Grail conceptually riffs on Seventh Continent, a game we reviewed years ago. It was the first game with a giant map composed out of cards full of narrative branches, a mixture of choose your own adventure and open world exploration. And whilst groundbreaking in idea, to us it was disappointing in execution. Seventh Continent was filled to the brim with frustrating gotcha moments that would have made me quit it long before we actually did if it wasn't for us being board game reviewers. Nothing is more infuriating than an arbitrary decision between an effective left or right, where if you choose left, hey, without any warning, it'll kill you and destroy the progress that you've made over the last 20 hours. Of course you could say, well, just fudge it, but that renders the entire affair meaningless. Once again, when it comes to box ticking, Tainted Grail nails it. And not just because the game's system for remembering things literally involves ticking boxes, but also because decisions will never lead you to outright death. And then when it does, there's a saving grace moment. If you do die, tick a special box and just restart the chapter. Questions whether there's any reason in theming peril as damage to hit points aside, that is a significant improvement over Seventh Continent and a big step forward. And now, of course, I tell you that after that comes a big step back. Imagine a passage filled with options. I'm trying to keep it vague here to avoid spoilers, but like many options, I don't know, 6. And you're like, cool. Option A doesn't look very interesting because it's just your bog standard, have a rest here before you do anything else, and that's fine. Option B vaguely looks like a plot point, but not a particularly engaging one. And option C looks cool, but to do it, I have to have the Kill the Magical Unicorn parts 4 and 5 complete, ask the princess to eat a diseased pelican part 7 incomplete, and also be on chapter 8. Cool, I'm on chapter 1. And options D, E, and F, they're equally locked off by things I know nothing about yet. Initially this feels curious. I mean, I want to find out about this magical reindeer killing plot point. I'm excited for it to appear in the future. I make a note in my notepad that if I return to Efkaville, I'll get to engage further in the reindeer storyline, even though I have no idea what it is yet. The world feels full of possibilities. Location after location after location, I keep being told that if only I had some ticks on the magical reindeer storyline, I could do something here, and after a while, it starts getting a little bit old, and I haven't even started that plot point. And when I do, yeah, the reindeer thing, magical, sure. And oh my god, spoilers, this system is actually telling me things about the game that I shouldn't know, don't want to know, but do know, because I can't play without finding out about them. I really don't want to know that there's something I can do at this location at the very end of the game. I might not know what happens when I engage with it, but that's still more than I'd like to know. I think the game wants me to treat these as seeds for future plots, to remember that there's something useful here and potentially make a note about it in the notebook. So I explored my first location and made a note about 3 things in that one location, and then another 5 things in the second location, and then 2 more things in the third. And after 5 hours of playing, my notebook looked like this, where you can clearly see that I've become Charlie Day. So I'm just going to, I think. Feels better already. You're probably sensing a pattern by now. I'll tell you how the game tackles the padding problem, but then develops other problems that it doesn't know how to tackle. Well, you would be wrong, because it just doesn't tackle it at all. Honestly, most of its 40-hour runtime is due to the fact that the game is fully rife with meaningless twaddle that you're forced to constantly engage with to get anything done. I wish one of these days there would be one of these 40-hour Kickstarter games that was 20 hours, or maybe even 10. It's fine, just make every hour count. First, travel. The map is, of course, designed in a way that makes certain spaces deliberately directly inaccessible. You'll have to move in gigantic circles to reach areas that, you guessed it, are key locations for quests. That on its own is forgivable, and from a thematic standpoint makes sense. Travel is never easy or direct. There's canyons, rivers, lakes and mountains and other nonsense, and that's just when I leave my house in Nottingham. Imagine what it's like in a dark reimagining of England, which these days is just England. But spending a day's worth of energy, and don't forget, a day isn't just a day, it's a turn of a Meniere dial, which means it's one step closer to needing to reactivate, which means you need to bring in buckets of meat, magic, and money. Spending a day's worth of energy is not enough, because most locations don't let you just calmly pass through them. You have to fight. Let's touch on how combat works. It's sort of alright. Each time you fight, you're playing a matching puzzle. If you're fighting something on your own, you'll match cards on your own, and if you're fighting with a friend, you'll match some cards, the enemy will attack back, then your friend will match some cards, the enemy will attack back again, and so on. Sometimes you'll face diplomatic encounters, which use a different deck, but aside from shallow surface mechanical differences, they are nearly identical to the fighty ones, so we'll just gloss over them. You'll start with 3 cards in your hand, and you'll try to match symbols according to stats you actually possess to the enemy card, and later to other cards that you have played. However, subsequent cards require you to match at least 1 bonus card play symbol. After you played all the cards you have or want, the enemy will hit you back. This is the really tricky part. Each enemy's attack depends entirely on how much damage you've dealt to it. For example, if you dealt it 3 damage, it could really nut you, or if you dealt it 5 damage, it could heal itself, negating all of the progress, or if you dealt it 4 damage, it could run away, robbing you of delicious, delicious rewards. Sometimes it isn't about how much damage you can dish out, but what dish do you serve first? If you ever wanted a game that simulates the disastrous anxiety of being a contestant on Come Dine With Me, this is it, except every meal is made out of knives. The problem isn't so much the combat system itself, but how it integrates with the rest of the game. If you're fighting by yourself, your friends can go make themselves a cup of tea. And if you are one of those friends and you've run out of milk, you're in luck, because you'll easily have enough time to pop to the shops, get yourself some more, whilst your friend painfully tries to figure out, turn after turn, every possible combination of matching symbols over and over again, an activity that matters very little to you aside from its actual outcome. And thus, location after location that trigger encounters as you move along them stretch the narrative strands you've been hunting as thin as tokens in the original printing of Castles of Burgundy. And just in case you've not been fighting enough, seeded events will spawn guardians, enemies that are hard and, like bad Come Dine With Me contestants, won't leave until you defeat them. Sometimes you'll end up with multiple guardians on the same location. Sometimes that location will be the one you need to visit for your current quest. Sometimes you'll just buckle up, fight, take damage. Each damage you take lowers the threshold of energy you are allowed per day, meaning you can do less, meaning days go by faster, meaning Meniers need reactivation quicker, meaning you need more resources, and the more and more you engage with this, the more the inescapable realization hits you. This is just a slog. Here is where publisher Awakened Realms goes all out and hires an actual award-winning fantasy writer. And it shows. The world has sense and cohesion. Things like the weirdness are an underlying mystery that pushes you to turn page after page. The subject of Arthurian legends is well researched, invoking major, minor, and throwaway characters interwoven into this dark reimagining. Dark reimagining. Dark reimagining. This is easily the most disappointing part, because after setting up something that I thought was going to be unique and inventive, all I got was a cheap Dark Souls knockoff where everything is dark or disturbing all dark and disturbing. If I had a penny for every time I read a foreboding adjective, I would have like an extra 100 quid in my pocket, which would at least partly cover the cost of Tainted Grail. And if I had another penny for every overall analogy, we would be quid pro quo. Get it? Because of the 100 quid. It's funny, and I wouldn't mind it so much if I wasn't just constantly told that things are dark and disturbing, but actually shown it. Instead, time after time, I seem to bounce into the exact same situation where I enter a new place and learn that things are dark and disturbing. There's probably two sides at each other's throats. I have to pick a side, but they're all bad because times are hard and everyone's struggling. And I will pick a side, even though I don't know why, and then I'll probably get some resources or maybe experience and then go to the next location. After reading hours of this, I felt like I was having a conversation with a drunken adolescent who was very passionately explaining Nietzsche. And at 36, I just don't feel like I have the energy for that. The gamification of narrative choices will often lead you to dead ends, asking you to repeat the exploration action, spending more energy over and over to once again inflate the length of the game. I'd argue that a game that presents you with a choice should make it an actual choice rather than an arbitrary deterrent, something that's become common practice in role-playing game design. Of course, that side of the industry had decades to perfect their craft, and this, instead of putting the wind in my sails, it just gave me wind from anxiety. This game, after all, hangs on how good the story is, and whilst it's incredibly competent at building a world and fleshing out the setting, the plot is threadbare, the payoffs are barely tangible, and there's nary a memorable character in sight. Looking back at other games with storybooks, even something like Above and Below, where the story was just set dressing for a light Euro game, left a much stronger impression. And if I told you that ultimately I found the story in Gen 7 more engaging? So, an utter failure on all accounts. Or so we would have you believe. If you ask Board Game Geek, this game boasts an astounding rating of 9.0. Other critics have also lavished it with praise, commenting on the excellent combat system and grandiose scale storytelling. So what's up? Has the entire world gone mad? Or are we just wrong? No, don't be ludicrous. We are never wrong. Consider that Tainted Grail is an entry in a genre of two, where it simultaneously improves on the original and then presents its own problems. Imagine that Star Wars started with the prequels and ended after the second one. This would basically be it. It would be rubbish, but it would be the only Star Wars we have ever had. And that's something. I understand why people want to like Tainted Grail. It's vast, beautiful, convoluted, and if you want to lose yourself in it, well, there's lots of it. And honestly, if you're one of those people, you probably already have this, and nothing we say can or should stop you from enjoying it. For what it's worth, the first 10 hours of Tainted Grail have been tantalizing, engrossing, and kept us wanting to poke, prod, and eventually swim through the game's mysteries. The problem is that once we dove in, we discovered that we're in shallow water, and as much as we want to swim through the waves, all we're doing is making sand angels, an utterly pointless affair as we're getting nowhere, and all our progress is just washed away. Would we knowingly recommend this to people? I think I'd rather watch a montage of Jar Jar Binks on repeat. If you want a dark fantasy adventure, might we recommend the Curse of Strahd adventure module for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you don't want to roleplay, but want the choose your own adventure, why not get a copy of Legacy of Dragonhold? And if you want a gigantic game with good dungeon crawling mechanisms, maybe get yourself a copy of Gloomhaven. You deserve it. Tainted Grail will only serve you if you want this specific strange mesh of open world exploration and choose your own adventure. And even then we'd hesitate to recommend it because it's the end of the video and there's still a huge list of problems that we didn't have time to address. So here's that list over some B-roll of me eating a very hot steak bake. The rulebook is not only convoluted, but omits a lot of rules. The structure makes it impossible to look things up, and then there's rules hidden in the storybook. It's one of the worst rulebooks since Batman Gotham City Chronicles, and that's saying something. Both female playable characters are hypersexualized. Say what you want, but in a world where everything is miserable and nothing is sexy, this feels like cheap pandering to plastic voyeurism and detracts from the theme. There's a potential situation in the game that will make you replay the same chapter for no reason whatsoever. You're towards the end of the chapter, you veer off a bit, decide to explore. You've done nothing wrong, you haven't lost in any sense of the concept, but then you just have to start over. Why? Because the game tells you to. You're frequently forced into situations that haven't been playtested. They pose questions that even the FAQ doesn't have answers for. You have to make up your own rules to move on. Progress is often curb-stomped by a totally arbitrary roll of a d6 die. Want to find out more about what happens in the narrative bit? Well, you can't, 'cause dice. The time dials are perhaps the most cumbersome and annoying way of tracking states in any board game ever. That's it. I haven't finished my steak bake yet, so you'll have to just watch me eat until I'm done. There's nothing else happening in this video. Silence from now on. I guess you can subscribe or something whilst you wait. You really don't have to finish watching this. You can see one of our other videos, or you can go donate. This was hard work. If you appreciated it, donate. That's really it now.